It was a quiet evening in the small town when the soft sound of wind passed through the windows of the orphanage. The building was old, its walls covered with fading paint and small cracks that told stories of time. Inside, children laughed, cried, and ran in circles before bedtime. Among them sat a small girl named Lena. She wasn't the loudest or the strongest, but there was something special about her, something gentle and deep that most people overlooked. Lena had lived in the orphanage for as long as she could remember. No one told her much about her past. The caretakers said her parents had died in an accident, but no one ever showed her any pictures or told her where they were buried. Sometimes she would lie awake at night wondering if her mother had sung to her, or if her father had ever held her hand. The only thing she had that made her feel close to them was music. She didn't know how to read notes or play instruments properly, but she could hum melodies that came from her heart. In the corner of the orphanage dining hall stood an old piano. Its wood was chipped, some keys were missing, and a few no longer made sound at all. The other children saw it as a piece of useless furniture, but to Lena it was her friend. Whenever she finished her chores, she would sneak over, wipe the dust off the keys, and press them gently. The piano responded with a mix of clear tones and broken sounds, but to her it was still beautiful. She called it Whisper, because it spoke softly when no one else did. One afternoon, while other children played outside, Lena sat on the small wooden bench by the piano. She closed her eyes and pressed one note, then another, trying to find a rhythm that matched her thoughts. The tune wasn't from any song she knew, it just came naturally, flowing from her heart like a story she couldn't tell with words. She didn't know it, but the caretaker, Mrs. Helen, stood near the doorway listening quietly. When Lena finished, Mrs. Helen smiled faintly and said, "You play like you're talking to someone." Lena looked up shyly. "Maybe I am," she whispered. "Maybe the piano understands me." Mrs. Helen didn't say anything more. She simply nodded and walked away, leaving Lena alone with the piano and her thoughts. Days turned into weeks, and Lena continued to practice whenever she could. Her fingers grew stronger and her ears sharper. Even though the piano was broken, she learned how to work around the bad keys, finding beauty in imperfection. The other children sometimes teased her, saying she was wasting her time, but Lena never stopped. In her heart, she felt that music could one day open a door she couldn't yet see. One rainy evening, something unexpected happened. The orphanage had arranged a small charity visit from local townspeople. They came with food, books, and some gifts for the children. Among the visitors was an elderly man named Mr. Adrian. He had kind eyes, silver hair, and walked with a cane. Most didn't know that he had once been a piano teacher in his younger days. As the event went on, the children performed small skits and songs for the guests. Lena didn't plan to play, but when one of the guests asked if anyone knew music, Mrs. Helen mentioned her softly. At first, Lena froze. Her hands shook and her heart raced. She didn't have a perfect piece prepared. But then Mrs. Helen gave her a nod of encouragement and she slowly walked to the piano. The audience quieted down. The rain tapped gently on the windows. Lena placed her hands on the keys, closed her eyes, and began to play the tune she always played, the one she made herself. The melody was soft and uncertain at first, but it carried emotion, something honest and pure. Even though some notes sounded wrong, they somehow fit. The song rose and fell like a memory being told through sound. When she finished, no one spoke for a few seconds. Then the room filled with quiet applause. Mr. Adrian wiped his eyes without knowing why. There was something in the way that small girl played that stirred old feelings deep inside him. After the guests left, Mr. Adrian stayed behind to talk to Mrs. Helen. He wanted to know more about the girl. When Lena came out of the kitchen after helping clean up, he asked gently, "Do you know what you just played?" She looked down. "Just something I made up." "It's not a real song," he smiled kindly. "Oh, it's real. It's as real as you are. Music like that doesn't come from books. It comes from here." He placed a hand over his heart. From that day on, Mr. Adrian started visiting the orphanage every week. He brought old music sheets and notebooks filled with notes. Since the piano was too broken to use properly, he began teaching Lena music theory on paper. He showed her how to imagine sounds through symbols, how each note could be like a word in a story. Lena learned quickly. She practiced tapping rhythms on the table, humming scales, and memorizing chords even without hearing them. When she got frustrated, saying it was too hard, Mr. Adrian would smile and say, The greatest music comes from patience. Even silence teaches you something. His lessons became the best part of Lena's week. For the first time in her life, she felt someone believed in her. He treated her not as an orphan, but as a student with potential. Over the months, a strong bond formed between them. He told her stories of how he once trained young pianists who went on to play on big stages. She listened with wide eyes, wondering if she could ever be like them. Sometimes she'd ask, "Do you think someone like me could ever play on a real piano?" And he would answer, "One day, yes. But first you must play with your heart, not your hands. That's what makes real musicians." As time passed, Mr. Adrian began to appear weaker. His visits grew shorter and he often coughed during lessons. Lena noticed but didn't dare ask too many questions. One day he came to the orphanage looking pale but still smiling. He handed her a small wooden box with a note. "For when I can't come anymore," he said softly. She didn't understand what he meant, but she hugged him tightly. That was the last time she saw him. Weeks passed without news. Lena waited every Sunday near the window, hoping to see his familiar figure walking up the path. Instead, one morning, Mrs. Helen came to her with a letter. It was from Mr. Adrian. The handwriting was shaky but clear. The letter read, "Dear Lena, if you are reading this, it means I can no longer visit you. I want you to know that you have a rare gift. You don't just play notes, you tell stories. Never give up, even if your piano stays broken. One day your music will find a way to be heard." Inside this box is a small envelope. It's not much, but maybe it can help you get closer to a dream. Play for the ones who can't. Your friend, Adrian. Inside the envelope were a few crumpled bills, barely enough to buy a second-hand keyboard. Lena cried quietly that night, not because of the money, but because the only person who believed in her was gone. Still, she promised herself she would keep playing no matter what. From then on, she treated every broken note like a message from him. Each sound that came out of the piano reminded her of his lessons, of how he said music could heal. Even when her hands grew tired or when others laughed at her imaginary concerts, she never stopped. She believed that if she kept playing long enough, someone somewhere would hear her song. Sometimes, during quiet nights when all the children were asleep, she would light a candle and sit at the piano. The faint glow would dance across the keys as her fingers moved slowly, softly. The sounds that came out were raw but full of feeling, like the whisper of a soul refusing to fade. She didn't know that far away, in another part of town, a man who would one day change her life completely was about to hear her name for the first time. But for now, Lena remained that small orphan girl with a big heart and a broken piano, playing her simple tune in the dark, unaware that every note she played was guiding her toward something extraordinary. And in the silence that followed each melody, the old piano seemed to whisper back, as if promising her that her story was just beginning. After Mr. Adrian's letter arrived, the days inside the orphanage felt quieter for Lena. She still sat by the piano each evening, but the air didn't feel the same. The other children went about their usual games, laughing and teasing one another, yet Lena often sat alone, touching the worn-out keys as if trying to call back the sound of her teacher's voice. Sometimes she imagined him standing behind her, correcting her fingers or smiling when she got a chord right. But all she had now were memories, and a small wooden box that she kept hidden under her bed. Inside it was the letter, the envelope of money, and a piece of an old music sheet he had once drawn for her by hand. It was full of pencil marks, faded eraser lines, and his small notes written in the corner. Every time she looked at it, she felt like he was still talking to her. Weeks turned into months. Lena continued to play her simple songs. Sometimes the caretakers told her to help with the younger kids instead. But whenever she found a spare moment, she went to the piano. The piano was missing more keys now, and some of the strings inside had come loose, but that didn't stop her. She learned to turn every broken note into part of the melody. One afternoon, while cleaning the dining hall, she noticed something strange, a small crack on the wall behind the piano. She brushed off the dust and smiled a little, thinking how even the walls were getting old with her. The orphanage itself seemed tired. The paint was peeling and the lights often flickered. The only things that seemed to still have life were the laughter of children and the piano's occasional music. Even though she didn't have a real teacher anymore, Lena tried to remember everything Mr. Adrian had said. He once told her, "Music is not about being perfect. It's about telling the truth." So she kept trying to be honest with her sounds. Every time she sat at the piano, she played what she felt: sadness, hope, loneliness, and sometimes even quiet happiness when she remembered something beautiful. One evening, when rain was falling outside and thunder rolled in the distance, Lena sat down again to play. The room was empty, and only a few lamps were on. She placed her hands on the cold keys and closed her eyes. Her fingers moved slowly, and she began to play the tune she had created with Mr. Adrian during their first lesson. It was slow, tender, and carried the sound of longing. She didn't know someone was standing outside listening. A woman who often helped at the orphanage had returned to drop off some food supplies. When she heard the faint piano notes, she stopped at the doorway and listened. There was something hauntingly beautiful about that sound, broken yet full of meaning. When the song ended, she stepped inside and said softly, "That was lovely." Lena turned quickly, surprised. "Oh, I didn't know anyone was here." The woman smiled. "I'm glad I was. You play very beautifully. Have you ever thought of performing somewhere?" Lena shook her head. I don't know real songs. I just play what I feel." The woman nodded with understanding. "Sometimes that's better than any real song." After that day, the woman, who worked in the nearby town, began bringing Lena small gifts whenever she visited: a set of new pencils, a small notebook, and one day a second-hand keyboard. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. When Lena touched the smooth plastic keys for the first time, her heart leapt. It was the first instrument she could play where every note worked. Every night she practiced quietly after everyone had gone to bed. The keyboard didn't make as much noise as the piano, so she could play without waking anyone. She learned how to move both hands together, how to build small melodies, and even how to play tiny pieces of famous songs that she heard on the radio. But even as her skill grew, she still preferred her own melodies. They came naturally, without pressure, and each one told a small story. One morning, as sunlight filled the old hall, the orphanage director came to speak to her. "Lena," she said with a kind smile, "someone from town told me about your music. They want to invite you to play at a small gathering next weekend. Would you like to go?" Lena froze. The thought of performing in front of strangers made her nervous. She looked down at her hands. "What if I make mistakes?" The director placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then you make them. That's how people will know you're human. Just be yourself." For the next few days, Lena practiced every spare minute she could find. The children watched her sometimes, whispering and laughing, but she didn't mind. She was too busy trying to find the perfect way to tell her story through sound. She decided to play a new melody, something soft, gentle, and full of hope, like sunlight breaking through rain. When the weekend came, the woman from town arrived to take her. They traveled by bus to a small community center. The room was decorated with flowers, and there were many chairs lined up in neat rows. A few people were setting up food tables and microphones. Lena felt her heart pounding faster with every step. When her turn came, she sat at the piano on the small stage. The keys were smooth and shiny, not like the broken ones she was used to. She took a deep breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The room slowly fell silent. Her song was simple, but it carried emotion, a mix of sadness and quiet hope. Her small hands moved gracefully, and her face showed the truth behind every note. When she finished, the room remained still for a moment, and then applause filled the air. Lena didn't know what to do. She stood there shy and overwhelmed, not used to being noticed. A man in the front row smiled warmly and clapped the loudest. Later, that same man approached her. "You have a gift," he said. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She lowered her eyes. "From an old friend. He used to teach me here, but he's gone now." The man nodded softly. "Then he must have been a great teacher." She smiled faintly. "He was." What Lena didn't realize was that the man was a local music producer who often helped organize contests for young musicians. He didn't say anything that day, but her performance stayed in his mind. When Lena returned to the orphanage, she couldn't stop smiling. For the first time, she felt that her music had touched people, that maybe, just maybe, she could share her songs with the world someday. Over the next few months, she kept practicing, growing more confident. The woman who had helped her with the keyboard continued to visit, often encouraging her to enter small local talent events. At first, Lena hesitated. She didn't think she was good enough, but the woman reminded her, "You don't need to be perfect, you just need to be real." So Lena began performing at small community gatherings. Each time she played, more people listened. Sometimes someone would even record her on their phone and post it online. Slowly, her name began to circulate around town. She didn't have fancy clothes or professional training, but her playing carried something genuine that people couldn't ignore. Back at the orphanage, even the children who used to tease her started cheering for her. They'd crowd around the old piano and ask her to play their favorite tunes. Lena would laugh and try to make up songs about their names or dreams. For the first time, she felt like she belonged. But one cold winter morning, everything changed again. The orphanage director gathered the children in the hall and announced that a national television program was hosting a competition for young musicians. The winner would receive a scholarship and a chance to study under a famous pianist. The director smiled at Lena and said, "You should try." Lena's heart raced. The idea of standing on a big stage in front of cameras felt impossible. But deep inside, she remembered Mr. Adrian's words. "One day your music will find a way to be heard." That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept imagining what it would feel like to play on a real piano, with lights shining and people listening. Then she thought of the children at the orphanage, of the old piano that had been her friend, of Mr. Adrian's lessons. Slowly, she realized she didn't want fame. She just wanted to make people feel something through her music. The next morning, she made her decision. She told the director, "I'll do it." Over the following weeks, Lena practiced harder than ever. She played until her fingers ached. She wrote her own melody, one that carried all her memories, her loneliness, her gratitude, and her hope. It was a song that told her story, even without words. The day of the audition arrived. The orphanage arranged a small car to take her to the city. As she looked out the window, the fields and trees rushed by, and her reflection in the glass looked different. Older somehow, braver. She whispered softly, "I'll make you proud, Mr. Adrian." When they reached the city auditorium, Lena saw hundreds of children waiting. Some wore fancy dresses and suits, some carried sheet music, and some had teachers and parents by their sides. She felt small and out of place, dressed in a simple donated outfit. But when she held the small music sheet Mr. Adrian had given her years ago, her fear began to fade. She waited quietly for her turn. Her hands were cold, her heart beating fast. She whispered to herself, "It's just you and the piano. No one else." When her name was finally called, she stepped onto the stage, the bright lights almost blinding her. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first few notes trembled slightly, but soon the sound grew stronger. Smooth, honest, alive. The melody carried across the hall, filling every corner with something pure and sincere. The judges sitting at the front leaned in. Among them was one man, a well-dressed millionaire with sharp eyes. At first he looked distant, but as Lena played, his expression softened. Her song, born from a broken piano and a lonely heart, reached him in a way he didn't expect. When the last note faded, the hall went completely still. Then came the applause, loud and full. Lena stood up slowly, her hands shaking, her heart full of disbelief. She had no idea that this moment, this simple tune played by an orphan, was about to change her life forever. And somewhere in the crowd, the millionaire judge kept watching her, his thoughts lost in something deeper, something personal, as if the music had awakened a memory he had long buried. The auditorium lights were still bright when Lena stepped down from the stage. Her hands were trembling slightly, her chest rising and falling fast. She had just played in front of hundreds of people, judges, musicians, families, and cameras. The sound of the audience clapping was still ringing in her ears. She had never seen that many people in one place, and for a moment she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She walked to the waiting area where the other contestants sat. Some were excited, others nervous, a few whispering about who might win. Lena sat quietly on a chair in the corner. She looked down at her hands, still shaking from the performance, and whispered softly, "I did it." For the first time in her life, she had played on a real piano. The keys had been smooth, the sound full and rich, so different from the broken piano back at the orphanage. For a few minutes on that stage, she forgot everything else. She wasn't an orphan or a lonely girl trying to prove herself. She was just a musician telling her story through notes. When the results were announced, Lena didn't expect to hear her name. There were so many talented players, children who had studied for years with famous teachers. But when the host called her name among the top finalists, the audience clapped again and Lena felt her eyes fill with tears. She couldn't believe it. She had made it to the next round. Back at the orphanage, the children and staff had gathered around the small television in the dining hall. When they saw her name on the screen, everyone cheered. The caretaker, Mrs. Helen, covered her mouth in disbelief, whispering, "That's our girl." The other kids danced and laughed, proud that someone from their home was being recognized. For once, the old building didn't feel dull or forgotten. It was full of excitement and life. In the days that followed, Lena received an invitation to return for the final round of the competition. This time, it would be broadcast nationwide. The letter included details about rehearsals, interviews, and a short biography request. The director of the orphanage helped her fill out the forms, writing that she had grown up there and learned to play on a broken piano. It was simple and honest, just like her music. When she arrived at the city again a week later, she felt more prepared, though her heart still raced. The rehearsal room was full of talented young musicians, each practicing on their own. Some wore headphones, others were accompanied by mentors. Lena quietly found a corner with her small keyboard and began to warm up. A young boy sitting nearby noticed her and smiled kindly. "You were the one who played that simple tune last week, right?" She nodded shyly. "Yes, it was really beautiful," he said. "Everyone backstage was talking about it. You made people cry, you know." Lena laughed softly. "I didn't mean to. I just played what I felt." "That's what made it real," he said before turning back to his own piano. Later that afternoon, the contestants were called for short interviews that would be shown on television before their performances. When it was Lena's turn, a woman with a microphone asked her, "How did you start playing the piano?" Lena hesitated for a moment, then answered quietly, "There was an old piano in the orphanage where I live. It was broken, but I loved it. A kind man once taught me about music. After he passed away, I kept practicing. I think maybe music was the only way I could talk about how I feel." The interviewer smiled warmly. "That's very touching. And what do you want to do if you win?" Lena looked thoughtful. "If I win, I want to fix the piano at the orphanage so all the children can play too." Her answer was simple, but when the video later aired before the final show, it touched the hearts of thousands watching across the country. People saw not just a talented girl, but someone humble, someone whose music came from pain and hope rather than pride. The day of the final performance arrived. The stage looked grander than before, gold curtains, shining lights, and cameras positioned from every angle. The millionaire judge, Mr. Rowan, sat at the center of the panel, his eyes calm but sharp. Lena didn't know much about him, except that he was known for discovering great talent. One by one, the contestants performed. Their music filled the hall, fast, complex, technical. When Lena's name was called, she took a deep breath and walked to the piano. The audience quieted down. She could see the reflection of the lights on the piano's glossy surface. For a second, her fingers froze above the keys. Then she remembered Mr. Adrian's words. "Play with your heart, not your hands." She closed her eyes and began. The first notes were soft, like the beginning of a memory. The melody rose gently, each tone carrying emotion. Her song told a story, of loss, of loneliness, of finding light again. The tune grew stronger, then softer, as if the piano itself were breathing with her. She didn't think about the cameras or the judges or the audience. It was just her and the music. When she reached the final note, she held it for a moment before lifting her hands. The hall was completely still. Then slowly, applause began. Quiet at first, then growing louder until the whole room stood. Lena opened her eyes and saw tears on some faces in the crowd. But what she didn't expect was the expression on the judge's face. Mr. Rowan sat motionless, staring at her. Something in his eyes looked strangely familiar, like he had seen her before long ago. After the show, the contestants waited backstage for the results. Lena sat quietly, her heart racing again. When the host finally came out to announce the winner, everyone leaned forward. "The winner of this year's National Youth Piano Contest is..." There was a pause. "Lena from the Greenwood Orphanage." For a moment, Lena didn't move. She thought she had misheard. But when everyone turned to look at her and started clapping, she realized it was real. Her eyes widened, her hands flew to her face, and tears streamed down her cheeks. The host called her to the stage to receive her award, a small trophy and a scholarship to study music at a special academy. As she walked across the stage, she looked out into the audience and saw Mr. Rowan still watching her. He didn't clap immediately. He simply looked at her with an unreadable expression, as if deep in thought. Later that evening, after the event ended, Lena was sitting backstage holding her trophy. She was tired but filled with joy. Reporters came to take photos, asking her about her life and future dreams. She answered each question politely, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. When most of the crowd had left, she heard a quiet voice behind her. "That was a remarkable performance." She turned and saw Mr. Rowan standing there. Up close, he looked older than on television, his hair silver but neatly combed. His eyes, though serious, had a certain warmth. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. He nodded. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She looked down. "At the orphanage. There was an old piano. It didn't sound right, but I loved it. I used to play even when no one was listening." He smiled faintly. "It's rare to see someone play from feeling, not from ambition. You reminded me of someone I knew a long time ago." Lena tilted her head curiously. "Someone who played piano?" "Yes," he said quietly, his eyes distant. "She was very special to me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he handed her a card. "If you ever need help with your music studies, call this number. I'd like to support you." Lena accepted it with both hands, grateful but confused. "Thank you, sir." "That's very kind." He nodded once and walked away, leaving her staring at the card in her hand. That night, as she sat in her small guest room, she looked out the window at the city lights and thought about everything that had happened. She still couldn't believe she had won. She couldn't wait to go back to the orphanage and show everyone the trophy. She wanted to tell the younger children that dreams could come true, even if you started with nothing. But deep inside, something about the judge's words stayed in her mind. The way he looked at her, the tone in his voice, it felt strangely personal, almost familiar. She didn't know why, but his eyes had seemed full of memory, like he had seen her before long ago. Back in his private car, Mr. Rowan sat in silence as his driver navigated through the city. He held a small piece of paper in his hand, a printout from the contestant profiles. Lena's name was there, along with a note about her background. Raised at Greenwood Orphanage. No known family. He stared at those words for a long time. Then he opened his briefcase and took out an old photograph. A young woman sitting at a piano, smiling softly. Behind her stood a man, younger than, with his hand on her shoulder. On the back of the photo, faint handwriting read, "For our little girl, someday she'll hear this song." Mr. Rowan closed his eyes. He hadn't seen that picture in years. His heart tightened as a thought crossed his mind. Could it be possible? He asked his assistant the next morning to quietly look into the girl's background. "Find out everything about her," he said. Meanwhile, back at the orphanage, the children threw a small celebration when Lena returned. They hung paper ribbons and cheered as she lifted her trophy for everyone to see. Mrs. Helen hugged her tightly, saying, "I knew you could do it." Lena laughed and said, "We did it. All of us. I couldn't have done it without you." She played a short melody on the old piano that night, the same one she had played in the competition, and everyone clapped along. What she didn't know was that far away, a man who had once changed her mother's life was now beginning to piece together a story that would soon change Lena's life forever. The music she played on that grand stage had done more than win a contest. It had awakened a past that had been sleeping for years, one that connected her to a truth she had never been told. And as the moonlight fell on the orphanage that night, the old piano seemed to glow faintly under the silver light, as if it, too, knew that something extraordinary was about to begin. When the music competition ended that night, Lena didn't know whether she should smile or cry. She had played her heart out, but she had no idea if anyone really understood what her song meant. All she knew was that for a few minutes on that big stage she had spoken through her music, and people had listened in silence. That silence had felt like a hug from the world she thought had forgotten her. As she stepped backstage, her fingers still trembling from the performance, she heard someone call her name softly. It was one of the staff members, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Rowan wants to see you," the woman said. Lena froze. Mr. Rowan, the main judge, the rich man everyone whispered about. the one who had built half the town's schools and owned a chain of hotels. She followed the woman down a quiet hallway that smelled faintly of old wood and perfume. Behind a glass door sat the man she had only seen from afar, tall in a dark suit, his silver hair shining under the warm light. His expression was serious but not cold. When he looked up and saw Lena standing there, something changed in his eyes. "Come in," he said, his voice calm but deep. "You played something tonight that I haven't heard in years." Lena didn't know what to say. She held her hands tightly together, feeling the rough edge of her wristband from the orphanage. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. He smiled faintly, then motioned for her to sit. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Nowhere, really. There was an old piano at the orphanage. It was broken. I used to play on it whenever I finished cleaning." Mr. Rowan leaned forward slightly. "Broken?" "Yes," she said, almost smiling. "Most of the keys didn't work. So I used to imagine the missing sounds in my head. I guess the piano taught me to listen differently." The man's eyes softened. "You played with emotion, not skill. And that's what music truly is." Lena lowered her gaze. "I just wanted to tell a story. I thought maybe someone would feel it." Mr. Rowan nodded slowly, but there was something behind his eyes, a hint of pain or memory. For a few seconds he didn't speak. Then he asked, "What was that tune called?" "It doesn't have a name," she said softly. "It's something I made when I was little. It reminds me of a woman's voice. I used to dream someone sang it to me when I was scared." The judge's fingers gripped the edge of his chair. "A woman's voice?" he repeated almost under his breath. Lena nodded. "I don't remember her face, but I remember her voice. It felt warm, like a song that never left." Something inside Mr. Rowan shifted. He stood up, turned toward the large window overlooking the dark city, and remained quiet for a moment. His reflection showed a man holding back old memories. When he finally spoke again, his voice was lower. "You should know something, Lena," he said. "Not every child gets to find peace through sound. But you did. That's rare." She nodded quietly, not sure what to say. He turned around, his face unreadable again. "You should come to the final round next week. I want you to play that tune again, but this time play it on a real grand piano." Lena's eyes widened. "A real one?" "Yes," he said simply. "My own." Her mouth opened slightly in surprise. "I've never played on a real one before." "Then it's time you do," he said. "Let's see what your heart sounds like when nothing is broken." When she left the room, she felt as if the air around her had changed. Something about the judge's tone had been strange. Kind, yes, but also filled with something deeper. She didn't know that the tune she played had pulled at a string tied to his own past. That night, Mr. Rowan sat alone in his office long after everyone had gone home. The lights from the city reflected off the grand piano sitting near the corner, untouched for years. He opened a small wooden box from the drawer of his desk. Inside was a photograph of a woman at a piano, smiling, her hands resting gently on the keys. She looked peaceful, but her eyes carried the same spark he had seen in Lena's. He hadn't seen that woman in years. She was the one person who had ever made him believe that money couldn't buy everything. They had loved once, long ago, before tragedy tore their lives apart. She had been a young pianist, talented but poor, and he had been her sponsor for a world tour that ended too soon. There had been an accident, a car crash on a rainy night, and after that she disappeared. Everyone assumed she had died. But now, hearing Lena's tune, something inside him stirred. A sound he hadn't heard since that woman used to play by his side. The melody, the pauses, the emotion, they were almost identical. He called his assistant that night. "Find out everything you can about that girl, Lena. Where she came from, where she lives, who raised her, everything." The assistant hesitated. "Is something wrong, sir?" "No," he said quietly. "I just need to know." Over the next few days, Lena went back to the orphanage, trying to act normal. The other children kept asking her how it felt to play in front of cameras, and the caretakers were suddenly kinder, offering her more food and gentle smiles. But Lena's mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about the judge. His words replayed in her head. "Let's see what your heart sounds like when nothing is broken." For the first time in her life, someone believed in her. Not out of pity, but because they saw something in her. She practiced on her little keyboard every night, pretending it was the grand piano she would soon touch. Meanwhile, The assistant's investigation revealed something Mr. Rowan hadn't been prepared to hear. "Sir," the assistant said, laying down a folder on the desk. "The girl's file says she was found near the edge of town about 12 years ago. No family listed. But there's more. She was wrapped in a blanket with initials stitched into it." "AR," Mr. Rowan froze. "Those initials, they were the same as the woman in the photograph, are you certain?" he asked. "Yes, sir. And one more thing. According to the orphanage, a woman once came years ago, weak and injured, asking about a little girl with that blanket. But she vanished before they could help her. The records say she never returned." Mr. Rowan's chest tightened. Could it be? Could this child be connected to her, the woman he thought was gone forever? He picked up the photo from his desk again and stared at it. The woman's smile, the eyes, the calm energy, it all connected now. Lena had her voice, her rhythm, her soul. That night, he barely slept. Every sound from the city outside felt like a note from that old forgotten tune. He sat at his piano and tried to play, but his fingers trembled too much. The melody Lena played kept echoing in his mind. The next morning, he made a decision. He had to find out the truth himself. The following week, Lena arrived at the large hall for her final rehearsal before the competition's grand round. When she walked into the grand room, she stopped breathing for a moment. In front of her stood the most beautiful piano she had ever seen, shining black wood, smooth keys, the reflection of the chandelier dancing across its surface. Mr. Rowan stood beside it, waiting. "Come closer," he said. "Touch it." Lena hesitated, then stepped forward and ran her fingers over the cool ivory keys. "It feels alive," she whispered. "Every piano has a soul," Mr. Rowan replied. "This one has waited a long time to sing again." She looked up at him with a small, uncertain smile. "You said it was yours?" He nodded. "It belonged to someone special, someone who taught me what music really means. Then where is she now?" Lena asked innocently. His gaze dropped. "She's somewhere far away." There was a pause between them, the kind that doesn't need words. "Would you like to play your song?" he asked gently. Lena nodded. She sat down, took a deep breath, and let her fingers move. The tune flowed out again, that same soft, emotional melody. But this time the sound was full and rich. It filled every corner of the room like a story told through light. As she played, Mr. Rowan closed his eyes. He could almost hear the woman's voice again, her laughter, her warmth, her touch. And when Lena finished, he opened his eyes, struggling to speak. "That song," he said, his voice barely steady. "Did someone teach you that?" She shook her head. "No, I just remember it. Sometimes I feel like I was born with it." He looked at her for a long moment. "You might be right," he whispered. Later that day, after Lena left, he made one final call to a private investigator who still owed him a favor. "Find the woman who disappeared after the car crash 12 years ago," he said. Her name was Annalise. The investigator's answer came 2 days later. "Sir, we found her. She's alive, but in a rural clinic, very weak. She has been living quietly, unable to afford surgery for an old injury. She mentioned she had a daughter. She's been searching for her." Mr. Rowan gripped the phone tightly, his throat dry. "Where is she?" 2 hours outside the city. He didn't wait another second. He got in his car and drove through the night, the rain tapping softly against the windshield, just like the night of the accident all those years ago. When he arrived at the small clinic, he saw her, thinner, older, but still with that same light in her eyes. When she saw him, tears filled her face. "I thought you forgot me," she said weakly. He took her hand gently. "I never forgot. I thought I lost you forever." She tried to smile. "I lost everything that night, even my little girl. They told me she didn't survive." He shook his head, his voice breaking. "She's alive." Her eyes widened, her lips trembling. "What did you say?" "She's alive," he said again. "And she played your song." Tears streamed down her face. "Our song?" "Yes," he whispered. "The same one." For the first time in years, both of them sat together in silence, holding hands, while a faint tune echoed in their hearts. The same melody that had found its way through loss, time, and silence. Neither of them knew how they would tell Lena the truth yet, but they both understood one thing: that music had carried her home long before they had spoken a single word. And soon, the world would know it too. The day after Mr. Rowan met the woman in the clinic, the sky stayed cloudy as if it too was holding its breath. He hadn't slept at all that night. The drive back into the city felt longer than before, and every sound on the road seemed to carry a question he couldn't answer. How would he tell Lena the truth? How do you tell a child who has known nothing but loneliness that her whole life had been a story waiting to be finished? He could still see the woman's tired smile, the way her hand had trembled when she whispered, "Is she really alive?" Those words had stayed in his head all night. Her eyes had been full of both hope and fear, the kind only a mother could carry. She had been through too much already. Years of pain, silence, and the belief that her little girl was gone forever. Mr. Rowan had promised her something before leaving the clinic. "I'll bring her to you," he said quietly. "But you need to rest first. Let me prepare her. I don't want to shock her too suddenly." The woman had nodded weakly. "Please tell her I never stopped thinking about her," she whispered. "Tell her I sang that song every night even when I couldn't play anymore." Now, sitting in his car outside his office, Mr. Rowan closed his eyes. The same tune Lena had played still echoed softly in his ears. It wasn't just a melody anymore. It was the sound of two hearts calling out for each other across time. That afternoon, Lena arrived at the music hall for her final rehearsal before the big event. When she saw Mr. Rowan waiting near the piano again, she smiled shyly. She didn't know that behind that calm smile of his was a storm of emotions he was struggling to hide. "Good afternoon, sir," she said softly. "Good afternoon, Lena," he replied, his voice calm. "Are you ready for the final round tomorrow?" "I think so," she said. "I practiced all night." "That's good," he said. "You'll do beautifully." There was a moment of silence. Mr. Rowan looked at her with a strange sadness that she couldn't understand. It was as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. "Lena," he said slowly, "have you ever wondered about your family?" She looked down at her hands. "All the time," she said quietly. "I used to think maybe they left me because I did something wrong. But now I think maybe something happened to them. Sometimes when I play, I feel like someone's listening, like I'm not really alone." He felt his throat tighten. "You aren't alone," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You never were." She gave him a confused look. "What do you mean?" He quickly looked away. "I mean that music has a way of keeping us connected to the people we love, even when we don't know where they are." Lena nodded slowly, thinking about it. "That's how it feels when I play that tune," she said. "Like I'm talking to someone I can't see." Mr. Rowan smiled faintly. "Keep that feeling tomorrow," he said. "It's more powerful than any lesson." Later that evening, as Lena returned to the orphanage, Mr. Rowan sat in his study and called the clinic. The nurse answered softly, saying the woman was doing a little better. The doctors had agreed to perform her surgery the next morning. The only problem was money. A lot of it was needed to make it happen quickly. "I'll cover every cost," he said firmly. "Don't delay it for a single hour. Save her." The nurse sounded surprised. "Are you family, sir?" He paused for a moment. "You could say that," he said finally. "I owe her everything." After hanging up, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had spent a lifetime surrounded by success, awards, and applause. But that night, none of it mattered. All he wanted was to fix what life had broken years ago. And if music had brought him this far, maybe it could bring them all together again. The next morning was cloudy again, but the city was buzzing. It was the day of the grand finale, the performance that would decide the winner of the national competition. Cameras were already set up, the audience filling every seat and the judges taking their places. Among them sat Mr. Rowan, wearing his usual calm expression, though his heart was far from steady. Lena waited backstage, her little hands cold despite the warm lights. She wore a simple white dress, one that had been donated for her by one of the show organizers. As she stood there, she thought about all the times she had played that tune on the broken piano at the orphanage, pretending the world was listening. And now the world really was. When her turn came, she stepped onto the stage. The grand piano shone under the spotlight. The audience fell silent as she sat down and took a deep breath. She began to play. At first, her fingers trembled slightly. But as the melody grew, she forgot the crowd, the cameras, and even the competition. The notes seemed to tell their own story, one of loss, love, and waiting. Her heart spoke through every sound. Mr. Rowan sat completely still, his hands clasped, his eyes moist. He knew exactly what those notes meant now. He could feel the woman's spirit in that song, and he could see her reflection in the little girl's eyes. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was so deep it almost hurt. Then slowly the entire hall stood up and applauded. The judges clapped, the cameras flashed, and Lena looked stunned. She had done it, not for the prize, but for something much bigger. As she stood and bowed, Mr. Rowan rose from his seat. "Lena," he called softly. She looked at him, puzzled. "Come with me," he said. He led her backstage, away from the crowd, into a quiet room. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked nervously. He shook his head. "You did something wonderful. Then why do you look sad?" she asked. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. "Because I have something to tell you. Something that will change everything." She frowned, not understanding. He sat down across from her. "That song you played," he said slowly. "It wasn't just a melody you created. It was something passed to you, from someone who loved you more than anything in the world." She blinked, confused. "Who?" "Your mother," he said softly. Her lips parted in shock. My mother?" He nodded. "She's alive, Lena. She's been searching for you for years." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "That can't be true. They told me she was gone." "She thought you were gone too," he said. "It was a terrible mistake. But she never stopped loving you. And the song, and it was hers. She used to play it when you were a baby." Lena's hands covered her mouth. Her body shook. "You know her? Where is she?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, she's in a hospital right now. She's very weak, but she'll get better. I promised her I'd bring you." "Can I see her?" Lena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," he said, standing up. "You can see her right now." The drive to the hospital was quiet. Lena sat in the back seat, clutching her small hands together. Her heart beat so fast it almost hurt. Mr. Rowan drove carefully, his eyes fixed on the road, but his mind filled with emotion. He had waited for this moment too, the moment when the two pieces of his past would finally find each other again. When they arrived, the nurse led them down a long hallway. The sound of machines and faint footsteps filled the air. Then, at the end of the corridor, was a room with soft light coming through the window. Inside, the woman lay resting, her eyes closed. Lena hesitated at the door. Her feet wouldn't move. "Go on," Mr. Rowan said gently. Lena took a slow step forward. The woman's eyes opened. When she saw the little girl, her lips began to tremble. "Is it you?" she whispered. Lena burst into tears and ran to her. "Mama!" The woman pulled her close, holding her as if she would never let go again. Both of them cried quietly, years of pain melting away in that single embrace. "I thought I lost you," the woman said through tears. "I thought I'd never hear you play again." Lena looked up at her. "I played your song," she said softly. "It found you," the woman smiled weakly. "It did," she whispered. "It saved me." Standing at the doorway, Mr. Rowan turned away slightly, his eyes wet. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. Music had brought them back together, and then somehow, it had healed something inside him too. Later that evening, as the sunset poured gold light through the hospital window, Lena played once more on a small keyboard the nurse brought into the room. Her mother listened with closed eyes, smiling. Mr. Rowan sat quietly by the window, his heart full. When Lena finished, her mother whispered, "That song belongs to all of us now." And for the first time in many years, the room felt whole again, filled not with pain or silence, but with the soft echo of hope. Outside, the city lights began to glow one by one. Somewhere out there, people were still clapping for the little orphan girl who played from her heart, not knowing that her song had done more than win a contest. It had reunited a family, saved a life, and reminded even the coldest heart that sometimes the simplest tune can carry the loudest love. That night, as Lena fell asleep beside her mother's bed, she whispered softly, "We're not broken anymore." Her mother smiled faintly and touched her hair. "No, my love," she said. "We never were. We were just waiting for the music to find us again." And in that quiet hospital room, the tune that had once been born from an old broken piano now rested gently in three hearts, complete, and finally home. The soft morning light filled the hospital room as Lena slowly opened her eyes. For a few seconds she didn't move, not wanting to break the stillness around her. Her mother was still asleep beside her, breathing softly, her face peaceful for the first time in years. The faint sound of birds outside the window mixed with the gentle rhythm of the heart monitor. It felt like music, quiet, real, and full of life. Lena sat up quietly and looked at her mother. It still felt like a dream. Every few minutes she had to remind herself that this was real. That the woman lying there was her mother, the one she had always imagined but never known. For so long she had wondered what her mother's voice sounded like, how her hands would feel, how it would be to say, "Mama," and get an answer back. And now, all of it was true. She remembered every moment from the night before, the way her mother had cried, the way her own hands had trembled when she touched her face, the way Mr. Rowan had stood quietly in the corner, giving them space while tears ran down his cheeks. It was like watching a piece of music come to life, note by note. When her mother woke up, she smiled softly and reached for her daughter's hand. "Good morning, my little tune," she said in a tired but loving voice. Lena grinned. "You remembered my song?" Her mother nodded. "I never forgot it. I used to hum it every night, hoping one day it would reach you." "It did," Lena said proudly. "It found me. And it found you." They both laughed quietly, though tears still filled their eyes. A nurse entered the room then, smiling at the sight of them. "Good morning, you two. The doctor says you're doing great," she said cheerfully. "You'll be able to go home soon." "Home?" Lena whispered the word as if testing how it felt in her mouth. It was a word she hadn't used in years, because she'd never really had one. Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "Yes," she said softly. "Home." Later that morning, Mr. Rowan came to visit. He walked in carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. When Lena saw him, she jumped up and hugged him tightly. "You kept your promise," she said. He smiled, a warmth in his eyes that wasn't there before. "I told you I would," he said, "and I meant it." Her mother looked at him with gratitude that words couldn't describe. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to," he said softly. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost a long time ago." They both understood what he meant. Even without saying more, after a short pause, he turned to Lena. "The Music Foundation wants to invite you to play at a charity concert next month," he said. "It's to raise money for children who don't have instruments or teachers." "I told them about your story. They'd love for you to perform your tune there." Lena's eyes widened. "Me in front of everyone again?" "Yes," he said, smiling. "But this time you won't be playing alone." She looked at him confused. "Who with?" He glanced at her mother and smiled. "Someone who knows the song even better than you." Her mother's lips parted in surprise. "Me?" he nodded. "It's your tune as much as hers. It belongs to both of you." For a moment the room was completely silent. Then Lena looked at her mother with a big smile and said, "We'll play together." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Together," she whispered. In the weeks that followed, their lives began to change in small but beautiful ways. Lena stayed at her mother's side as she recovered, helping her learn to walk again, holding her hand when she felt weak. Every day they practiced together on the small keyboard that Mr. Rowan had arranged to have delivered to their home. The first time they played side by side, Lena felt something she'd never felt before. Balance. Her mother's hands were slower, gentler, while hers were light and quick. But when their notes came together, they sounded like one. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Sometimes they would stop in the middle of practice and just laugh. Her mother would tell her stories about when she was younger, how she fell in love with the piano, how she used to play in a small cafe before life changed, how she always dreamed of performing with her child one day. And every time she said that, Lena would smile and whisper, "That dream came true." When the night of the charity concert finally arrived, the city theater was glowing with golden lights. Dozens of people filled the seats, families, musicians, and people from the media. The banner on the stage read, "One Song, One Heart, Charity Night for the Children." Backstage, Lena stood in a soft blue dress, her hands slightly shaking. Her mother, now healthier and standing beside her with a cane, rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you nervous?" she asked. Lena nodded. "A little. What if I make a mistake?" Her mother smiled. "Then you keep playing. Mistakes are part of the music." Lena took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay." When their names were announced, the hall erupted in applause. The two of them walked out slowly, the lights bright but warm. The grand piano waited at the center of the stage, shining softly under the glow. As they sat down, the audience grew silent. Lena looked at her mother, who gave her a small nod. Then together they began to play. The opening notes floated through the air like a whisper, gentle and full of feeling. Then Lena's hands joined in, filling the hall with sound that felt alive. The two of them didn't look at the crowd. They only looked at each other. It wasn't just a performance. It was a conversation, a reunion, a story told through sound. In the front row, Mr. Rowan sat with his hands clasped, watching them with tears in his eyes. He had seen many performances in his life, but nothing like this. This wasn't music meant to impress. It was music meant to heal. When the song reached its quiet middle part, the one Lena had once played alone in the orphanage, her mother took over for a few soft notes. Her touch was light but full of life, and the sound seemed to travel straight into every heart in the room. Then Lena joined in again, and together they carried the melody to its end. When the final note faded, there was silence. Not a single person moved. Then slowly the applause began, soft at first, then louder until the entire hall stood on its feet. Some people were wiping their eyes. Others just smiled with awe. Lena looked at her mother, who smiled through her tears. "You did it," her mother whispered. "No," Lena said, shaking her head. "We did it." As they stood and bowed, Mr. Rowan rose from his seat, clapping the hardest. He didn't say anything, but his eyes said everything. After the concert, reporters surrounded them, asking questions, taking pictures, and wanting to know more about the miracle story of the orphan and the mother. But Lena didn't think of herself as a miracle. She just thought of herself as someone who finally got her song back. When the crowd finally cleared, she found Mr. Rowan standing quietly near the piano. She ran up to him and hugged him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." He smiled and put a hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You gave me something too." "What's that?" she asked. "Hope," he said simply. She smiled up at him. "Do you think people liked it?" He chuckled softly. "I think they'll remember it forever." That night, as they left the theater, the streets outside sparkled with city lights. Lena walked between her mother and Mr. Rowan, holding both their hands. For the first time in her life, she felt complete. When they reached the car, her mother looked up at the stars and said, "You know, your song saved more than just me." "It saved him too." Lena looked at Mr. Rowan, who smiled quietly but didn't say anything. As they drove home, the city lights passed by the windows like little fireflies. Lena leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, tired but happy. "What will we do now?" she asked softly. Her mother smiled. "We'll keep playing, and we'll teach other children to play too." Lena nodded sleepily. "I'd like that." Mr. Rowan looked at them in the rearview mirror, his heart full. He knew that life had given him another chance, not just to help others, but to feel something real again. A few weeks later, a video of their performance went viral online. Millions of people watched it, many saying it made them cry or reminded them of their own families. Donations flooded into the charity, helping hundreds of children get music lessons and instruments. But for Lena, fame wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that she could now sit at a piano every morning with her mother beside her, and together they could let the music flow. Sometimes, when the sun set and the house grew quiet, she would play that same tune, the one that had started everything. Her mother would sit nearby, humming softly, and every now and then, Mr. Rowan would visit, standing quietly by the door, smiling as the familiar melody filled the room. It was a simple tune, born on a broken piano, played by a lonely girl. But it had become something far greater. It had found a way to heal, to reunite, and to remind everyone who heard it that love can always find its way home. When Lena finished playing each time, she would look at her mother and say, "This song belongs to all of us now." And her mother would smile, nod, and whisper, "Yes, and it always will." The story that began with a broken piano ended not in silence, but in harmony, a gentle, everlasting melody that would continue to play in the hearts of everyone who heard it.